Committee of the Whole. We're going to start a little early since our council meeting ended early. I don't know what's going on. Somebody has some feedback. Welcome. It is about 6:55, and I'm calling this meeting of the Committee of the Whole together on Tuesday, February 23rd with a quorum present. Before we start, I want to explain what we're going to discuss tonight and what you can expect. A committee of the whole is usually called when there is a big item, project, educational aspect that we need to discuss as a council together instead of siloing it into committees. It is a way for us to have an educational aspect where everyone gets the same information at the same time and allows questions as a body. We are not going to be taking any action. There will be no votes taken tonight on any decisions made on remediation or made on any zoning issue. That was done. A zoning is done through statutory limits, and that was started last week at Plan Commission, so that is running through the timeline that it needs to run. But what we will be discussing is the test results at 1300 Cleveland. We have the consultants online, and we are hoping that the DNR will be coming online as well to answer the questions of the council. There will also, one other thing, I've seen some things online, and I want you to understand there's no proposals will be entertained tonight either about anything that has been entertained in the past year. This is just about the test results. What we will do, the only thing we may do as a council is come to consensus on where this information now shifts, what committee to continue the discussion. I will be allowing public comment after the first presentation and the initial questions by the council. I think it's important. I very much want to hear your voices. I understand that you want to be heard. But I want to also say that this will not be your last opportunity to speak on this matter. So no worries there. This is just the beginning of a long process. As I told someone that I talked to from my district, that government is messy and does not go in a straight line, but we will get there. So with that, I am going to start with a presentation from GEI Consultants on the soil groundwater sampling results at 1300 Cleveland Avenue. I think we have him on WebEx, correct, Eric? Is that Mike?
Yes, Mike Dabrowski.
Mike Dabrowski is here. Leslie, our clerk, will be doing the slides. Go ahead, Eric, if you need to start.
Yeah, so, as many of you know, this parcel's had a fairly sordid history, both with industrial uses as well as DNR investigation, remediation over the years. We reviewed the long history of this and the information that we had on file. We presented that to committee and council back in July of 2020. The city council directed us to prepare an RFP to go out to conduct a phase 2 study of this parcel. So we did that. We did that in collaboration with some of the council members and the interested parties that wanted to be a part of that. We did hire GEI consultants for that. We completed an extensive and exhaustive testing was conducted of this property. GEI prepared a report summarizing those results, which is in your packet tonight. And based on those results, the DNR has issued a city responsible party letter on February 16th, 2021. So as we are the owners, we have our GEI consultants online this evening, Mike Dabrowski and Roger Miller. They're the environmental experts that will walk you through the report and summarize the report for you, as well as answer any questions. Matt Thompson is also scheduled to be on the line tonight to answer any questions. Again, these individuals are the experts in the field with environmental, so if there are questions, there's a lot of information out there in the media and social media that not quite accurate information. And so we want to make sure that all of you have detailed, factual, and accurate information so you can make well-informed decisions beyond tonight with the results that have come forward. So with that, Mike Dabrowski and Roger Miller can walk you through the presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thank you, City Council, for the opportunity to present this evening. So the first slide that you have up there illustrates all of the soil borings and temporary monitoring wells that were installed as part of the Phase 2 assessment at this property. The red locations are locations where we collected soil samples only, and the green locations are locations where both soil and groundwater samples were collected. Generally, the borings were advanced to 12 feet below ground, except at the temporary well locations, which were advanced deeper to obtain groundwater samples. Generally, those were at depths of between approximately 28 and 33 feet below ground. And as Eric had suggested, the locations and the numbers of borings and wells were selected by the city during development of the Phase 2 scope. A few locations were adjusted at the time of sampling to avoid subsurface utilities and or work around obstructions that were present on the days of sampling, either through stored materials by the city or by the contractor using the site for storage of materials. The next slide is, if you could advance, the next slide is one of 3 slides which summarize the soil samples collected during the Phase 2. Up at the top, you can see the location identifier, identified SB1, SB2, etc. In the next row, the sample was collected below ground. The next row is PID results, and a PID is a field instrument that we use during sample collection to qualitatively assess for the presence of certain volatile organic compounds to help us identify appropriate locations for collection of samples if the instrument identifies anything during sampling. Then there's the date the sample collected. Below those columns are the analytical results of samples that were submitted to a subcontract environmental laboratory. So those are results not from EI, it's from a subcontract laboratory that's qualified to do those analyses. And then at the far left side of the table are the specific parameter groups that were analyzed and the individual substances within those groups that were detected in at least one of the samples that were analyzed during the Phase 2. So as you can see in the first group, priority pollutant metals, you have a series of metals that are included in that laboratory analysis, including antimony, arsenic, beryllium, cadmium, etc. The next group is what are known as semi-volatile organic compounds. Within those group of compounds, there are various subcategories, one of which is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are all of the compounds that are represented on this table are identified in that group, which are primarily fossil fuel residuals. So pretty common in urban environments. And then there were also analyses completed for PFAS compounds, which are in the news quite a bit recently, and then also volatile organic compounds, which are commonly associated with petroleum products, gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, as well as certain cleaning solvents, chlorinated solvents, dry cleaning fluids, things like that. Within the table, we have data that are highlighted in thick boxes. So for each box that's highlighted, that particular result exceeds one of the Wisconsin regulatory standards that are also identified on the table. And on the table, the regulatory standards are identified as BTV, which is a background threshold value. That's a concentration that's accepted by the DNR as not exceeding naturally occurring background levels. Generally, BTVs are only associated with inorganic substances such as metals. And as you can see on the table, there are some metals for which the DNR has not established background threshold values, either because it was not a priority at the time they went through that, or they just did not have information at the time to develop a BTV for that substance. The other regulatory standards are non-industrial DC, which is a direct contact value, which is a value that is established for protection of human health through direct contact, either ingestion, absorption, inhalation. The DNR has established a contact value for both an industrial site and non-industrial site, and the non-industrial applies to commercial, residential, anything that wouldn't fit into that industrial category. And then there's also a GW standard, which is a groundwater protection standard, which is a standard established by the DNR to protect groundwater quality. So as I indicated on this table, each value under a sample identifier exceeds at least one of the Wisconsin standards identified. So for instance, at location SB1 in the first column of data, chromium, which is identified as having a 55.4 concentration. If you go to the left, you can see the corresponding box, which is the 44, which is the background threshold value, which means that the sample at the site, which was analyzed, had a concentration of chromium above the background threshold value, but that concentration did not exceed one of the other Wisconsin regulatory values, which is the direct contact or groundwater pathway value. And we'll go into more discussion about the meaning of these results after we go through the table, but generally that's what's presented on the next three slides are individual compounds detected and the standards they exceed. The fourth slide, or actually it would be the fifth slide, which is the groundwater. So there you go. This is the data at the site relating to groundwater quality. So as indicated earlier, there were 3 temporary monitoring wells installed during the phase 2, SBGW1 through SBGW3. Groundwater samples were collected and the results are presented like they were for the soil data. Again, values which were identified in a groundwater sample collected from the site, if they exceeded one of the corresponding regulatory values, which in this case are preventive action limits and enforcement standards, they are highlighted in a dark, thick box, and the corresponding regulatory value exceeded is also highlighted with the same box. In Wisconsin, the regulatory standards are preventive action limits and enforcement standards for groundwater. Generally, these values correspond to federal levels. The enforcement standard is typically either the groundwater drinking standard or a maximum contaminant level, and the preventive action limit is some percentage of that maximum contaminant level or drinking water standard. And generally, if a concentration of a substance is detected in soil or in groundwater above one of these standards, typically the DNR will require further assessment at the site. What should be noted is that these values, particularly in soil, are not mandatory compliance standards. They're not. You don't have to clean up a site to these standards. They allow, use of other means to address public health concerns, such as installing barriers, pavement, soil. You don't have to necessarily remove every piece of soil that exceeds one of these standards. So that's something important to keep in mind as we go through this. The next slide reiterates some of those points. I don't know if you want to take this one.
Sounds like somebody else.
Hey, I think I can unmute myself with the space bar.
There you go.
Yeah, we just wanted to highlight a few of the takeaways from the phase two. Something to be aware of is, the city did provide what we would consider to be a very thorough scope for testing, both in terms of the density of the sampling that was done and the range of analytes. We looked at a broad range of potential contaminants of concern. And one of the things that jumped out to us in the data is that we really didn't find some of the signature contaminants that we might expect if we're dealing with contamination from a closed cabinet factory, that used, wood finishing products. For instance, we didn't detect pentachlorophenol. That's a common wood preservative. We also didn't detect any volatile organic compounds. These would be residues from fuels, adhesives, and these types of contaminants, if they're present, would take some additional engineering controls or cleanup approaches in something instead of, capping, as Mike had described a little bit. Regarding some of the other COCs, many of the metals, virtually all the metals really are naturally occurring to some degree. The fact that thallium was detected doesn't really surprise us. It's not that commonly assessed, and it's actually not a metal that's in the list that the DNR uses to classify soils as in current guidance. But, it was something that was detected, so we're going to address that occurrence. Mike had also touched on polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. These are common fossil fuel residues. These can be from emissions from coal-powered power plants. It can be soot. It can be runoff from asphalt streets. Basically, you test for PAHs in an urban environment, you will detect them, and more than likely you will detect them above some standards. There's a halo of PAHs around every asphalt road in the state. We're dealing with compounds or with substances that are very common in an urban environment that aren't necessarily associated with a known activity at the property. Pardon me, I have to look up over top of a obstruction here. In particular for thallium, that is a metal that is associated with electronics production, low temperature thermometers. Years ago, it was used as a rodenticide. It can also be from coal combustion residues. It is also found in low concentrations in sulfide minerals or in some naturally occurring rocks that are present in Marathon County. The thallium, although we detected it, it didn't correlate back to a known historical manufacturing activity. The concentrations are probably on the order of 1 part per million that would be found in the Earth's crust. So we're not surprised in finding that. Okay, Mike, did I miss anything that that was pertinent for this slide?
I think that's primarily the points that we wanted to get across, yes. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this kind of highlights, Eric had mentioned, we did have a brief meeting with the DNR. The DNR did issue a responsible party letter, which requires the city to complete additional assessment and complete an investigation under NR 716 of the Wisconsin Administrative Code. And this slide generally provides a process under NR 716 that we will be following to address the compounds detected at the site and to ultimately obtain regulatory closure from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, which once you reach that point, the DNR makes a judgment that what remains at the site does not pose a significant threat to human health or the environment. So either enough remediation has occurred or enough remedy has been applied through capping to protect human health and the environment. So this kind of outlines the process that we'll take as we progress down this path. So the next phase of this investigation will be preparation of a site investigation work plan, which is kind of the fourth box down the chain. That site investigation plan will be developed in coordination with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. We've had discussions with the city about, having the DNR review that plan, providing feedback, making adjustments as necessary to make sure that it's appropriate for the substances detected at the site and the use of the site. Following that work plan development, the site investigation will occur. There will be some decisions and evaluations made after the first investigation. We wholly anticipate that there will be not just one investigation event. It's likely at a site like this, based on the contaminants we're dealing with, that there will be multiple iterations of investigation, work plan revisions, DNR meetings to kind of evaluate data so that, when it's completed, the site investigation addresses all of the current concerns at the site. Following that, a site investigation report will be completed, and within that report, there will be a discussion of remedial actions that are appropriate based on the findings. At this stage of the process, it's critical to identify what the ultimate use of the property will be, because that will have a significant impact on the chosen and the costs associated with that remedy, whether it be an industrial site or something that's not industrial. So at this stage, it's important to understand that so that the remedy can be chosen appropriately. Following that, there's also a DNR review process in there, which isn't shown, but the remedial action or remedy would be applied. And again, that can be, depending on the scenario, that can be a combination of a remedial excavation. It can be installation of soil or pavement barrier, or a combination. So the remedial action will occur after the site investigation and options are evaluated. There could be some sampling associated with that to determine if the remedy was successful. That remedy is summarized in a remedial action documentation report and then into a case closure request, at which time the DNR reviews information and determines whether sufficient testing and remedy were applied to protect human health and the environment. And assuming they agree, the case would then be closed. And then, that would presumably, if the city turns over the property at that point, could be the end of the city's involvement, or if there's, redevelopment of the site, there will certainly be activity required after closure because there will likely be residual substances remaining at the site that will need to be addressed as part of redevelopment. I think what's critical about this whole process is that the DNR will allow some flexibility to progress down this path, considering redevelopment alternatives being evaluated. Typically in scenarios, we will try to leverage the site redevelopment to cover much of the remedy that we can. So for instance, if a cap, whether it be a pavement cap or a soil cap, might be required for part of the site, and a redevelopment includes, a half-acre parking lot that happens to be over the top of an area, well, that's certainly something that can be utilized as a final remedy during redevelopment, rather than trying to implement that remedy before redevelopment and then redisturbing that area and then installing another remedy afterwards. It's more sustainable and more cost-effective to do it during redevelopment if possible. Now, certainly there are some situations at some sites where it's not appropriate to do that based on the levels of contaminants or the types of contaminants, but we don't think that this would likely be one of those sites.
Yeah, Mike, thanks. And I would just add, we've worked on a lot of redevelopment properties that have varying concentrations of metals and PAHs. This is very common in an urban environment. And, in practical terms, what we would anticipate is that ultimately what you would think of as the remedy cost would probably be the excess soil that can't be reused as fill on site as part of the new construction. Is the material that would need to be exported. Chances are there would be, some level of contamination in much of the excess soil that would probably mean it would go to a landfill. But on the plus side, I would think any redevelopment of this property would likely include a significant amount of hardscape, which would be the building or parking, sidewalks. That's going to provide, a cap against direct contact exposure to any residual contaminants that, when we're talking about metals and PAHs. And in the landscaped areas, you may just have to have a little bit more soil fill, 12 inches of soil plus 6 inches of topsoil, something like that. So, if I owned the property, I would be looking at, how I could, integrate the redevelopment or, the cost of construction that needs to happen anyways, have that become the cap, maybe look at ways to creatively, keep some of the soil on the property if I could. Maybe there's an area where the concentrations are a little bit higher that I need to disturb. Maybe we dig a little bit more out there and go to the landfill. But I wouldn't look at, trying to remove everything from the site so that there'd be no, quote unquote, no contamination left.
Yeah, Roger, and I think what's also important to note is that, on the slide where we finally obtain case closure, it is conceivable that there would be a scenario in which there would not need to be any soil removed and disposed off-site if the redevelopment was such that there wasn't a lot of excess soil generated. So, I just wanted to make that clear that, there is potential that, one of the closure pathways does not include any or significant quantity of soil being removed. Okay, well then we go to the last slide. So this slide was prepared to give the council, kind of a general idea of the types of investigation and remedy costs that could be associated with this site, depending on various end uses. What needs to be understood is that, this is early on in the process. As I indicated, we anticipate rounds of, site investigation, field efforts, plan amendments, and the results of this next phase or next phases of investigation can have a significant impact on the cost of the remedy. The cost of the remedy is also significantly impacted by the end use of the property, industrial versus non-industrial, and the extent of the site that's planned for redevelopment, assuming that the remedy occurs concurrently with site redevelopment rather than occurring before. The sequencing of remedial action, which I just indicated, and then also the ability to reuse low-level impacted material on site during the redevelopment. So, the DNR would allow under certain situations, creation of a screening berm where you could place some low-level impacted material and then place a cover over the top of that, incorporate that into part of the redevelopment. So the costs that I've identified on the table are for one specific scenario. And within that one specific scenario, there is uncertainty, both in the extent of the site that would require to have a remedy, and also in the types of pathways that need to be protected, whether it be direct contact, human ingestion, or groundwater protection. So, for this specific slide, what's presented here are costs associated with the city trying to obtain case closure before redevelopment. So this would be, not the most sustainable or cost-effective approach, but it's one approach. Just to give you a representation of the difference between industrial and non-industrial. It's important to note that the costs do not include post-closure activities, i.e. those things that would occur during redevelopment. So if you obtain case closure, there would still be residual impacts and there would be costs associated with managing soil that would be excavated during redevelopment if there isn't a home for it on the site. And then I've made some assumptions. So these are broken down into optimistic costs, more probable, which are more likely to occur, and then pessimistic costs. And it's important that the pessimistic costs are not maximum potential costs. Certainly the costs can be higher than what we have identified here. This is just for, kind of a general idea. For the optimistic cost on the industrial end use side, based on existing data, we made an assumption that, approximately 3,300 square feet of the site would require some type of remedy. And what we've decided to do here is, assume that a remedy would be excavation of about 1 foot of soil and then installation of a barrier, primarily, basically a soil cover over what remains in that 3,300 square foot area. So this again is one remedy for direct contact only. So these assume that we're not addressing a groundwater issue at the site, which is still possible. The optimistic cost for the non-industrial use based on existing data, we know that, a larger percentage of the site would likely need some type of remedy if the end use was non-industrial, whether it be residential or commercial, because the level of, or the types of contaminants and the level of contaminants detected exceed standards more often in samples under a non-industrial end use than they do under an industrial end use. So for the optimistic cost on the non-industrial side, we assumed approximately 10% of the site, or 33,000 square feet, would require some type of remedy, and we applied the same remedy as we did for the industrial costs. Again, 12 inches excavated, and then we put 18 inches of cover on top of that, which, as you can imagine, would raise the grade of the site by 6 inches in some areas. So then what you have here are a breakdown of the costs. So as you can see, in these cost ranges, there's certainly more uncertainty with an investigation and a remedy being applied to non-industrial end use because of the substances detected, the concentrations detected. There are more uncertainties moving forward with how much of the site might exceed industrial standards, and also, how much of that might need a remedy based on. There's still uncertainty in industrial end use numbers, but less so than with the non-industrial. Roger, I don't know if you wanted anything else to add to this slide at all?
No, Mike, I think that was a good summary, but again, these cost ranges are all prefaced on the city moving forward with a remedy beforehand. And, as we have touched on before in our experience, it is definitely more cost effective to integrate a remedy as part of the new construction, and you only have to disturb or move soil around in one shot. Mm-hmm. And you can have that plan in place with the DNR before you construct if it's appropriate to do so. Or, if the city would rather get closure beforehand, then, one of the scenarios or cost estimates we're talking about here would likely apply.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess I'm going to entertain questions for these. Go ahead, Alder Killian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for presenting that summary. I do have some questions about a few of your assertions. So when you were talking about PAHs and their commonness in urban areas and so forth, as well as background levels, and are you asserting that you typically see over 9,000 parts per billion of some of these as background levels?
No, I was just talking in terms of PAHs being detected at concentrations that commonly would exceed one or more, of the standards. I wouldn't say that, the highest concentrations detected, would represent a background condition. At the same time, PAHs are ubiquitous in urban environments. We see them, in many urban fills along roadways, from stormwater discharges. So Yes, does that answer your question?
It does. So that statement was not accurate earlier. And in fact, the DHS recently did a study of Milwaukee on PHH background levels. Mr. Grosskirth sent it to me about a week or two ago, and some of these levels far exceed that. So perhaps it was kind of misspeaking earlier. I'd like to make sure it's all fact-based. And then, yes, in terms of being ubiquitous, so are many harmful chemicals like dioxin and PCB and so forth. So that too is not overly relevant, I don't think. When you talk about thallium, I had a brief conversation with at least one regulator, and it was my understanding that really thallium had not been seen very commonly in Wausau or Stevens Point in terms of background. And I know you can't study every area in intense depth because you work on a lot of projects, but in 1986, for example, just across the street in monitoring well 7, thallium was detected in the groundwater, and it was also detected northwest of there in monitoring well 8, but there were non-detects throughout the rest of the neighborhood. So, that was something that had caught my attention. Could you explain a little bit more about the sulfide potential connection? In your work, have you ever seen it associated with sulfites?
Well, thallium is a rare metal. I mean, it's not commonly studied or assessed. It does occur with, sulfide minerals. It can be associated with pyrite or fool's gold and some other sulfide minerals. It is present in the Earth's crust, per EPA information, on the order of 1 part per million as an average. Our concentrations were a little below that, a little above that. It may be somewhat higher in concentrations where you have glacial deposits or bedrock where you have more naturally occurring metals in them. We are going to be taking a closer look at thallium, looking at data that exists for other sites around us. There may not be a lot of that data available. We may be, doing comparisons, on this site, looking at thallium concentrations in fill versus thallium concentrations in soil that's outside of fill, is one thing we would do. I did take a quick look at the thallium data for the site you're referencing to the north, and I did notice that, although they had non-detections of thallium in soil, I think their detection limit was 2 part per million. So, it could be there, in a lower concentration range, such as what we detected on this site.
I believe the detection limit was lower than that, sir. I don't have it in front of me, but I would think at least 1 part per million, but
Okay.
that's just off my head.
The soil concentration ranges would be in the part per million range, and the groundwater would be down in the part per billion range. But we'll definitely be taking a look at that as part of the work plan development stage.
Thank you, and I wanted to let you know that in Connor Forest Industries' lists of materials used at the site, they reportedly, self-reported, burning 1,200 pounds of sodium sulfite in their boiler each year. And then moving on to what you said about some of these not being, or in fact, I believe all of them not being able to be connected to former Connor operations or prior operations. It looks like the highest levels of PHHs that you saw actually were right around the above ground storage tanks, that if you look at the aerial photos from the 1970s, they almost directly overlay with the highest levels that you found. And in the city's records from 1986, someone working under Mr. Jean noted that she could barely bore a sample there because she kept hitting solidified lacquer or resin. So I just wanted to let you know that actually that does correlate to past above ground storage tanks there. I don't know if you were aware of that. And then one more question for now.
Right in our report.
let my colleagues take part, of course. Just on the level of detections, it looks like on some of the individual samples, the level of detection for certain contaminants was actually above the state regulatory standard or limit. Therefore, first of all, am I correct when I look at the lab data? Like thallium, one of them's got a 4.6 level of detection, and that's way over the regulatory standard. So are you going to go back, if that's the case, and make sure that we're actually using a sensitive enough test there? Thank you.
Roger, you were going, well, yeah, I'll take this one, Roger. So, the testing was sensitive enough, but in some samples, there were clearances at the lab which could not be quantified, which resulted in elevated detection limits. When the DNR reviews that data, typically they will consider something with an elevated detection limit as an exceedance unless it is proven otherwise.
Thank you.
Alder Rasmussen, do you have your hand up?
I do, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So I guess I have just a couple questions. So we focused on thallium because that did seem to stand out in the report. And over the last week or so, there's been a couple news stories about the site based on our robust testing and the fact that we're getting test results tonight and reviewing them publicly. One of those stories today, in fact, really focuses on the historic uses of thallium and really leads people to fear that this site is highly poisonous. That said, that really frightens neighbors. And, I think people are concerned about everything from, drainage and runoff to, the disturbed and blowing soils, when there's not snow on the ground, obviously. I think people are very concerned about migration of the things that are found there, and based on this focus on the historic uses of thallium in industry, I think that's really going to create a volume of fear in the community based on the readings we see. Are we to assume that this site is presenting some immediate danger? Because realistically, we've not been in a hurry to develop anything on that site. That's why we've, pulled back the RFP that we sent out over a year ago to engage in this robust testing, to figure out if the site is useful for anything or nothing. And this particular site hasn't paid property tax in decades. It doesn't need to anytime soon. But, based on the findings in the report, is there some imminent danger that would cause us to need to engage in remediation on an urgent, once we have some interaction with DNR and a plan, should we proceed with great urgency to protect neighbors from whatever is existing in this property? Now, granted, whatever's in there has been in there for an awfully long time. But, is there cause for fear in the neighborhood, which really has been stirring up a lot lately?
Okay, Michael, I'll try to address Lisa's comments. We do have, detectable thallium. It is above a non-industrial direct contact threshold. So, right, you wouldn't want to have, kids playing on bare soil or, breathing in soil particles, anything like that. It is below, an industrial standard based on exposure for workers at an industrial site. To put this a little bit into context, arsenic is another metal that is commonly found. Arsenic has a background value in the state of 8 parts per million, but it also is known to be toxic at much lower levels. It's known to be toxic at an industrial site at 1.6 part per million, I think, and at below part per million range. But, we recognize that it is something that is present in geological materials, particularly glacial soils. You look at any farm in the eastern half of the state where you have reddish brown soil, well, those glacial soils have appreciable arsenic. And when you detect it, it's going to be above, one of the direct contact thresholds. Now that's a much more studied metal than arsenic, and I don't want to claim that they're, similar, in their toxicology, but just to say that, we do know that there are metals that exist that are common, throughout our geologic, or throughout the state, and, they aren't considered to pose an imminent threat. Again, I kind of looking at this property, I think the best thing is to develop it with something that has, a good amount of hardscape, be it building, parking lot, and then make sure you have a good landscape cap. That protects direct contact. So virtually any new development, whatever it is going to protect against direct contact pathway.
Thank you for that. That answers my question.
Yes, thank you. I have a,
Go ahead, Ms. Alder Peckham, yes, and then
Okay.
I'll get to you, Alder
okay,
Larson.
thank you. I had one that kind of piggybacks on what Alder Rasmussen was asking. And I'm wondering if these contaminants, especially the thallium, migrate, and whether we should be thinking about testing adjacent properties. It's been mentioned that there's a vegetable garden adjacent to the south end of this property. And do thallium particles bind to soil and stay where they are, or do they get washed around, or what's the deal on that?
Well, we're going to be looking more into the behavior and occurrence of thallium, as we proceed with the study. In general, metals tend to stick to soil particles, stick to naturally occurring organics. They can move through surface water runoff. There is some leaching of metals down through the soil column and could eventually get into groundwater. But they tend to be more of a concern by directly contacting soil that has the metals in them. There can be some, there's certainly some uptake of metals in plants and in crops. One of the, going through the NR 700 process like we are, we will need to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the DNR that we have defined the extent and degree of the contaminants of concern at this property. And that's going to be able to say, okay, this is the extent of the substances that exceed standards, also considering the evaluation or the technical basis for what may be really a background condition. We may have to do some testing, a little further away, but, we're not going to be chasing a background condition around town if we have the data that really supports that conclusion. But at the end of the day, we need to, show we have our arms around the issue, and that there is a remedy that's going to protect against exposure.
Okay, if I could, I got a couple other relatively quick ones. You mentioned the possibility of removing some of the soil to a landfill, and I'm wondering if, based on what you know now, would that be a hazardous waste landfill, or would a regular landfill be appropriate?
Yeah, we don't have any data so far that would suggest we'd be dealing with a hazardous waste. I think, Mr. Kramer brought up a good point that yes, PAHs are noticeably higher at the location of the former ASTs, and it may be appropriate just to, to dig out that hot spot and, take it to the landfill. But no, this all, based on the data we have, would suggest it would be, acceptable for landfill disposal as a solid waste. We may have to do a couple other tests, because it's kind of an unknown fill condition that we would be seeking approval to dispose of. But, Nothing that suggests it's a hazardous waste at this stage.
Okay, and then it sounds like you're not really pointing the finger back at Connor Forest Industries for the bulk of this to really be able to say that they're responsible, and that perhaps we could go after whatever's left of that company?
Well, this may be getting into kind of a legal arena. Mike, I don't know, it looks like you were ready to maybe jump in on this one.
No, I mean, I was going to say that, the more data we collect, the better we will be able to evaluate potential sources of substances detected at the site. Right now, the only sources that we are aware of, potential sources, are the, former uses of varnishes, stains, and finishes by the Connor Forest. There are reports in various historical documents generated from the site that there is documented 3M fill that at some point had been deposited on portions of the property. And that's documented in a report that, various thicknesses of what reports identify as 3M rock flour was identified at the site. So, whether that particular fill is, a source of some of these detections, that will be borne out with the more data we generate. Likewise, with the elevated PAHs detected near the former AST locations, that still is possible that it's related to historical fill that was brought onto the site. But with more data, it may conclusively show that it is associated with the AST. So we don't know at this point, but the data currently suggests a bulk of this is likely related to a fill condition that historically existed.
Okay, and then finally, quickly, and I'll shut up, how about a timeline on this? Do you have any idea how long? There are a lot of steps to go through here.
Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly going to take some time to work through a work plan. We want to make sure it's well thought out, addresses concerns that the DNR has. So that will likely take a couple of months. The site investigation itself, as indicated earlier, we anticipate there's going to be multiple rounds of investigation and work plan revisions. That's likely going to take several months. And then, at the point it gets to developing remedial options, that's where, ultimately, if a decision isn't made on, what end use the property will be, it could kind of stall out there, or it could proceed as we have projected that, the city wants to pursue closure before redevelopment. And then it really depends on, the results of the site investigation and how much of the site will require a remedy. So, I mean, all told, if you're being optimistic, maybe 9-12 months. And that would be very optimistic, I think. Roger, I don't know if you have anything to add to that timeline.
That seems, pretty good as a ballpark. At the same time, we work on redevelopment projects where plans come in to focus, really any time during the investigation phase and, looking at remedy options or remedial options. So, so we can be flexible with, the timing needs from the city or as interest may, potentially increase for different types of development options.
Alder Larson, your light went off, or you still want to speak?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
I guess Alder Peckham asked the question I was going to ask, what kind of time frame we're looking at here. And one other question I have to add to that is, at what point in this graph here from the Phase 2 investigation to the case closed, do we as a council, should we decide what we need to use this land for? Should it be industrial, residential? At what point do we do that? Do we do that sometime in between here? Do we do that after case is closed? Can you please fill us in on that, please?
Well, yeah, in order for us to pursue case closure, you will have to identify an end use. You will have to decide whether you're pursuing an end use that's industrial or non-industrial, because that will impact the remedy selection and cost. The earlier the decision is made, the better, because while, the DNR will require assessment of these results regardless of the end use, certainly under an industrial end use scenario, there will be less assessment required than under a non-industrial scenario. So, as our cost breakdown demonstrated, there is a higher cost attributable to site investigation on a site that will be used for non-industrial purposes than there is for one that would be used for industrial purposes. Now, the most significant cost will be remedy selection. So it would be good to have a decision made before. And the earlier you can make the decision, likely the less costly it will be for the city.
And my next question would be, where, if you don't think the thallium came from the Connor Forest industry, where do you think it came from? Is it as a result from 3M fill, or can you enlighten us on that, please?
Yeah, it is, we will be taking a look at the occurrence of thorium or thallium on the site. And it may very well be that the data indicates that it is largely or, virtually entirely associated with a natural background condition. There's, as I already mentioned, there's, EPA information that suggests thallium is present in the Earth's crust at about 1 part per million. We detected slightly below that and slightly above that. So we're right around in the natural ballpark or natural background condition to start from. But we will be taking a look at what is available, that's published, along with, what are the differences in thallium between fill and native soils, and then present some conclusions to the DNR for their review and concurrence, or, maybe we, you have to adjust things a little bit. But, we're certainly going to be taking a close look at that metal data.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Elder. Go ahead, Laura.
Just one more question on methodology and so forth. I see that you tested at 0 to 4 feet on almost every sample except for SB1. You did not take any sample at 0 to 4 feet. Could you please explain your rationale on that methodology? Were there utilities? Was there something you were afraid of hitting?
Sample selected for analysis, and that was a location, if I'm not mistaken, we had hit this material previously identified as rock flour, so we wanted to select a sample that was representative of that material.
Thank you, and I don't have the numbers up in front of me. I know they're here somewhere in this document, but if I recall, was SB1 did you find fairly elevated levels of thallium compared to the others? Was it in fact perhaps the highest? I'm trying to pull that data. Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, I'll look at that right now. So SB1,
Yeah, it looks like the highest to me.
yeah, so it was well, yeah, so looking at SB1, first at the boring log, I wanted to confirm that that was the case. So SB1, we had an appreciable amount of this light gray silty fine sand representative of this rock flour material from a depth of 3 feet to 6 feet. But then there was also a thin layer of brown sandy silt with trace cinders also in that material at a depth of 6 to 7 feet. So it's a combination of both in that sample. And then that being said, looking at the data, yeah, so 1.7, we had other detections in that same range, 1.3, 1.4, 1.6. So statistically speaking, I don't know that it's, real significant.
Well, I'm not a math surgeon, sir, but I can tell you that it is the highest number numerically, so I would assert that is significant. And as an environmental activist, when I would see kind of inconsistent testing depths, that's probably one that I would want to see the top 4 feet taken, because that would be a red flag for me. And then my last question would be, when you were taking these, were these composite samples or were they discrete samples?
Well, I mean, they're discrete samples within that 0 to 4 feet interval, but in order to get sufficient volume for analysis, it's not representative of a 0 to 1 foot horizon or a 0.5 to 1 foot horizon. It's representative of the 0 to 4 foot horizon. During the site investigation, various approaches can be taken to delineate intervals. You can cut those intervals as fine as you want, or as broad as you want to some degree. But for phase 2 purposes, generally a 0 to 4 foot sample, which is representative of the direct contact zone, is common.
Thank you. And yes, I think it would be positive to perhaps get some discrete samples in the top 12 inches, particularly with the VOCs. Thank you.
Alder Rasmussen, do you have your hand up again?
I do, thank you.
Okay.
I guess just a follow-up question as we, listen to some of this report. If we are undertaking, which we know we are, future investigation and some diagnostic stuff here, if these compounds that we're looking at really occur in nature, naturally occurring, that's one thing. But if it is really the result of a fill condition, I felt for a long time in this area that the DNR, the city, and the neighborhood should all have a common enemy. And that common enemy should be the private sector polluter if there is one. And so that said, if this is the result of a fill condition, knowing the prevalence of this rock flour material, will our testing, follow-up testing, be robust enough to know if this rock flour byproduct and perhaps even the colorants that are used in the manufacture of roofing granules at the adjacent plant across the street could lead to some culpability for that facility? For decades, and in many areas of that neighborhood, that byproduct was dumped and has been found. And, will we know enough to determine if there's some level of responsibility on that facility? Now, the bulk of the rock that's crushed in that facility comes from a quarry in the town of Maine, just north of Wausau. So it could be naturally occurring in the quarry as well. And then the material that they're taking out of there, crushing, and then we have this byproduct that, apparently has been dumped feet deep over there decades ago. Will we know enough to determine if there's responsibility there?
Well, Roger, take part of this. You know, I don't think the data is going to demonstrate conclusively who, you know, who deposited the fill or exactly where the fill came from. You know, there may be some correlation between the types of materials encountered and the concentrations detected, but beyond that, you know, our job as engineers and scientists isn't to, you know, identify what off-site source may have contributed to that. It is, you know, what levels are detected on the site and how do we address those levels with respect to Wisconsin standards. You know, beyond that, you're getting into a legal arena that, you know, we just don't like in that arena. You know, and certainly the DNR is going to be involved in this to some degree, and you know they're going to be able to make decisions based on the data that they. But again, you know, they're not attorneys. You know, they have rules and regulations, and you kind of use the data and the standards that are and make decisions on the site conditions and how to protect human health and the environment.
Thank you for that. I guess I struggle with industrial use in the area, but I also struggle with the idea that anyone should ever be allowed to live there as well. So we have, you know, a unique juxtaposition of land uses to figure out, but that helps tremendously, so thank you.
Any other questions? I see that we have Matt Thompson from the DNR is also appearing per WebEx. I don't know, Matt, do you have anything to add about maybe your investigation and how that's going to be run from this point on?
Sure, I can jump in. I think Mike and Roger did a great job outlining the process that we're going to follow. They have experience with sites like these. I wanted to kind of just reiterate that this is the early stages. We're looking at preliminary data. Decisions influencing the site are going to be made the next few months as we get more data. That will really inform the direction that we need to take. I really appreciate the questions being asked about off-site sources or even just the source of the 3M data, the 3M fill. Mike is right. I'm a geologist, not a lawyer, but I think these are great questions that we can, at the DNR, take back to our legal team and ask. Should we be asking broader questions? But that's sort of independent of this site. We'll certainly look at the data here. It may lead to broader questions, but ultimately, we're just going to react to the data as it comes in, and I believe try to work as cooperatively with the city and their consultants as possible, and certainly in a transparent way. And I'm definitely open to answering any questions, but again, I think the gentlemen from GEI have done a great job kind of laying out the data, what they have found, as well as the process moving forward.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Alder, go ahead.
Thank you. A question kind of related to Alder Rasmussen's question about the thallium. Is there, you know, from a geological, scientific, you know, viewpoint, can you look at sort of the structure of what you're finding of the thallium is appearing in? Is it, you know, sort of like in a natural form, or is it in a granulated, industrialized form? Is it sort of mated to other material, seemingly as part of a process to create something else? I mean, are you able to look at, you know, the actual physical thallium rather than it just tracing its existence? Can you analyze its form to determine whether or not it's, you know, sort of a naturally occurring or something of an industrial nature?
Well, Mr. Neal, that's an interesting question. I mean, it is true thallium can, you know, be present in different mineral forms, and, you know, I'm not a thallium expert by any means. You know, I think we can learn a lot by assessing for total thallium. It may be difficult when we're looking at the soil samples to differentiate, different matrices or something. A lot of what we're seeing is, even though we're calling some material fill, it's still essentially like a soil. If we encounter some other material that's non-soil, that has some other properties, that would jump out as a different type of a matrix to test. There might be some other analyses available, but those would be a little bit, those would end up being pricier if you're trying to look at, metal isotopes or get into some different chemistries. But, we'll be working with the DNR, and if there's, some other data that may, help us better evaluate the site condition, we'll look at that. But, probably total thallium is going to give us, the answers with respect to the questions for, site redevelopment and land use and, protecting against exposure.
Sure. I guess I'm just thinking in terms of, the city's determination of possible responsible party sourcing, and if we can identify something as an industrial, element, rather than something that was just, scooped up in soil somewhere. That might be helpful for us, that's all I'm saying.
Alder
Thank you.
Ryan. Alder Ryan, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did, Becky. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I was just going to chime in as well that one of the retired professors from UWMC has given kind of walking tours in the spring around Mother's Day of the Ice Age Trail. And he had mentioned a few times that Marathon County has one of the most diverse geology of any county in the nation. So there may be something to that. I know where I lived in town of Texas back in the late 90s was sandy loam along the Wisconsin River, and I would think some of those maps could kind of pinpoint more of how diverse the geology is. I know the consultants are really bringing a point across that the preferable way to handle the site is probably a lot of concrete parking lot or a larger building or whatever, but I know a number of us would like to see residential, but I'm just not sure if it's really appropriate there. One of my neighbors who was a former alderperson had mentioned, and I guess I have an interest too, is there some advantage if we decided to make that site a park with a lot of trees? Would that kind of mitigate what would be involved? It's just as another option.
Well, whatever the final land use is, it will need to have some sort of a protective measure against this direct contact exposure. That could be a combination, that could largely be landscape, geotextiles, some other controls. It kind of stands to reason that whatever type of typical development could occur at the site would be a combination of hardscape and landscaped areas. But I mean, there would be nothing technically, to prevent you from, creating some sort of a green space that would entail, more, of a soil fill cap. And whatever cover would be installed is something that would have to be maintained long term. And if the cap was damaged, it would need to be repaired. If it was, if there was a need to dig through the cap to do some work for something on a utility or something else, we'd be working with the DNR at that time to properly manage the underlying material.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, and again, this is all on the presumption that we're just dealing with a direct contact issue. As Matt had indicated, we're early on in this process. Currently, it's our opinion we're unlikely to have a significant groundwater quality issue at the site. However, if additional data suggests that there is a groundwater quality issue where substances are leaching from soil into groundwater, strictly having a soil-based cap is likely not going to be sufficient in that scenario. You would have to have more than likely a more significant cap, whether it be compacted clay or some type of hardscape like a pavement building in order to protect groundwater quality.
Alder Larson and then Alder Peckham. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe this is a little irrelevant, but I just wanted to put this on the record for possible future discussion. And that being is that maybe the city might sometime in the future might want to take some independent tests of 3M Park maybe to see where the source of this contamination came from. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I could get a little clarification. In the response to one question, it was stated that the contaminant levels there are above the non-industrial standard, so maybe kids should not play on that property. Then in response to a later question, it was stated that as far as thallium, 1 part per million is, not uncommon, and the levels that were found here aren't that far out of whack with that. So those two things are confusing me. Where are we at with that?
Well, that is a good observation and a fair point. It is true that there are metals that exist in the natural geology of the state that are at concentrations that are somewhat higher than you would like, for, a non-industrial or a residential land use. Arsenic is certainly one of them. It may turn out that, thallium, would represent a similar condition in some parts of the state. But again, I think whatever redevelopment plan comes into focus is going to be, is going to provide the protective measure.
So if your kid was in the neighborhood, would you tell them to stay off that property?
Yeah, he'd be trespassing.
Nice sidestep.
Yeah.
What would you tell your child if, they'd say, even though the road is open there and would be illegal, do you want the kid over there or not?
Yeah, it's, I definitely wouldn't want my child eating soil from the site.
Okay, Alder Killian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I was going to follow up on Alder Peckham's question, but I think Mr. Dabrowski just said it well with not wanting his child to ingest that soil on the site. Just for distilling it down to kind of fact-based conclusions, Mr. Thompson, I've got a question for you. Two questions. Could the DNR please confirm for us this evening that levels of thallium found in the soil of the city-owned property at 1300 Cleveland Avenue exceed state regulatory standards, specifically non-industrial contact standards?
Yes.
Thank you. And has the DNR reached kind of a threshold level of data or facts that suggests in any way, and I'm not talking about kind of broad geology lessons or speculation. Has the DNR been given any set of data which proves that this is from background or natural levels, the thallium?
We haven't been given data to suggest otherwise. I think we're kind of in between. And that's where our recommendation to the city and to its consultant comes in, where we've asked them to take additional samples from native material. So if you look at the soil borings, we can identify rock flow to a certain depth. We've asked that they go back out and take soil samples from below that. And that will help us determine maybe where the source of the thallium is coming from. So again, I think it gets back to that limited data set. This is a phase 2. Any other site, we would be looking at this and using this to kind of instruct more sampling. And I think we're going to get that.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense to me that we do not have that data just yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Any other questions from the body? I don't see anybody hands up with WebEx. Eric, you have anything else to add? No? You say no on WebEx? Okay, I guess I don't have anything to add as well, and so we can get to number 2, public comment. We are, again, I'm just reminding people, we are, and you have heard our presentation, we are at the beginning of this process. But we feel it's important, the mayor and I both feel it's important to hear from you. We're asking everybody to speak 3 minutes or less. No questions can be answered directly by the council members. That's the way it works for us. And everybody be respectful, and we will call your name. Thank you so much. Joyce Ludke, is she here?
I just want to let you know that I will be counting you down with some helpful signs. So
she's been busy. Let me see. Chris Norfleet, is he here?
if anybody's on the phone,
Yes.
maybe that might be a thing. Okay.
Okay.
To the phone number ending in 49, can you identify yourself?
Yeah. Okay, we can try one more.
The phone number ending in 25, are you wanting to speak tonight?
Yes, that's Joel Lewis.
We'll call on you once it's your turn.
Well, hang on, okay. Nailing Zhang, come on up. Name and, come on up, speak, please address us with your name and address in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Jay Ling Zhang, and I live at 202 Chella Street on the south. I am a family member that's on the south side of Cleveland Ave that has a vegetable garden.
Oh.
Yes. So I came here today just wondering how thallium is and everything like that, but I was really wondering about the vegetable garden. And just wait, after a minute, okay. I was wondering if there was if these chemicals happen to be in our garden, and just for the safety, would it be possible if the garden could be checked or looked at in some kind of way? Yes.
Thank you. I'm sure your representative will follow up with you and discuss that with you, okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Bruce Grau.
Hi, I'm Bruce Grau, 1115 North 10th Street. Thallium has gained a notoriety being known as the poisoner's poison. We heard tonight that even the consultants wouldn't want their kids playing in it and certainly wouldn't want anybody eating it. Not just the soil, but I'm sure the plants that grow out from the soil as well. at Cleveland, 1300 Cleveland Avenue, we know that thallium, along with arsenic, is all over the place. Just as Jay Ling just witnessed to us, and he has very deep concerns that we share about his garden that sits in the bottom of the slope behind this site. Yet I didn't see any red or green dots that spoke to that area. So this plot was supposedly zoned as residential, but because of an honest mistake, it's labeled industrial, and the city is considering going along with this, and instead of pursuing opportunities for housing as they initially intended, and for good reason. Because it's no mistake that working Wausonians are hurting for safe and reasonably priced housing. We'll need over 400 new residences by 2025. Other unmistakable facts of the state of our housing, and this is pre-COVID, so it's much worse now, I'm sure. 336 households are overcrowded. Substandard housing is more prevalent here than in the entire country. 31% people live in unaffordable housing. 42% renters spend more than 30% of their income on housing needs, as well as 21% homeowners. And 68% of the existing housing in Wausau is considered unaffordable to low-income Wausonians. So really, we need all the land we can get for affordable housing, and the land should be free from poisonous industrial waste. So we request the city council provide these safe environments for working households that can shelter and thrive. We request to remediate the soil at 1300 Cleveland, not to expand toxin-producing industry at this site or any other site around residential areas, perform phase 1 and phase 2 soil testing of all residential areas surrounding industrial sites, and proceed post-haste with the Housing Affordability and Security Task Force to address our dire housing needs significantly heightened by the pandemic. I think it would be a deliberate and dishonest mistake for City Council that so courageously supported guaranteed basic income to avoid taking every measure to address its people's needs for safe and affordable housing. Now bear with me here. Cha ya chula nya hauhe. Sacar veneno del suelo. Lugares seguros para personas trabajadoras. Remediate and populate as originally planned. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go back. Joyce Ludke, is she on the phone? She's not here. Okay. And Chris Norfleet? Okay. Joel Lewis. Mr. Lewis?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. I tried to say something last time, but it didn't seem that you could hear me. So anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. My name is Joel Lewis. I live at 807 Turner Street, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54403. I'm also a community organizer, and so that's how I first became aware of some of the issues here in this neighborhood. And so I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who has worked and advocated for having the testing done here. It was really great to hear that we're not rushing through this, and so I just want to commend all of you that have played a role in that and say thank you. Based on my interactions with people in that neighborhood and people in the community, I get the sense that folks really would like to see that rezoned as residential, and so I am going on record asking that we could consider that, not because I would like to see homes put there necessarily or a park or anything like that, but because I would like to not see the expansion of more industrial work in that area. I think that that's really, the underlying issue here in that neighborhood is that, I think folks feel like they're being pushed out potentially by industry, and then have also been impacted from, potential years of pollution. And so I would hope that you would consider, I know you're not voting tonight, but I hope that you consider in the future when you do vote on this issue to rezone this to residential. And again, thank you all so much for all you're doing on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Terry Killian.
My name is Terry Killian. I live at 133 East Thomas Street. As a spokesperson with Randy Radke for Citizens for a Clean Wausau, I have before me, and you have received, the evaluation which Stephen Lester, a Harvard-trained renowned scientist and toxicologist, provided to CCW after reviewing the environmental testing done at 1300 Cleveland Avenue. Since I have only 3 minutes to address this body, I won't read the technical aspects of the report. The DNR will evaluate the technical aspects of thallium and decide whether or not they feel this very toxic substance is a potential risk to the welfare of the residents. I will only read that part of the report which addresses CCW's reason for existence, to fight and monitor pollution and speak to protect the health and safety of residents. The report. Soil samples were collected from this site that found high concentrations of metal and of particular, and are, you're annoying me, Kate.
I'm sorry. Pause it.
Don't do that, I lose my place.
I'll just give you 10 seconds.
And of particular concern are high concentrations of thallium. Thallium can be released into the environment by combustion or improper disposal of combustion waste, and when it enters the air, water, or soil, it remains there for a long time without breaking down. It can enter the food chain by building up in plants and fish. People can be exposed to thallium by eating these contaminated foods, living near waste sites, breathing contaminated dust, and by touching or allowing contaminated soil. Exposure to thallium can have devastating effects on many parts of the body. Even short-term exposure can cause dysfunction of the nervous system, heart, kidneys, lungs, and liver. It can even cause death. Studies in animals have found that ingesting thallium can cause reproductive and developmental defects. Scientific evidence makes it clear that thallium exposure can pose a danger to human health and life. Although thallium can be detected in native soil, as most heavy metals are, the levels of thallium found at 1300 Cleveland Avenue site are above state and federal guideline values that warrant cleanup. This is particularly important given how dangerous thallium exposure can be and how close some of the thallium contaminated soil samples are to people's homes. Thus, our recommendation is that in order to protect the health and life of Wausau residents, cleanup and remediation of thallium must be done before any development occurs at the site. In closing, I would like to ask you as representatives of the people to think about how you would feel living next to this site and eating your vegetables from the garden. I wouldn't be comfortable, and I'm pretty close.
Thank you. Randy Radke.
Hi, my name is Randy Radke. I reside at 244 Wyatt Street, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54401. Dear Mayor Rosenberg and Wausau City Council, Citizens for a Clean Wausau has addressed the council repeatedly and provided data regarding contamination issues in the city. There has most often been negative pushback, but after literally years of debate, once testing was finally completed, the testing results validated the concerns that were expressed and shown to be factual. Again, the city has a decision to make, this time regarding 1300 Cleveland Avenue. This property has a history of gross contamination, and the city was willing to move forward without additional testing with the Community Partners Project and a place for the homeless. Alderperson Killian provided factual data regarding the contamination, and he also arranged to allow community feedback. Interestingly, the Phase 1 done by REI advised no additional testing was necessary. However, after further examination of the factual history, again provided by Alderperson Killian, additional testing was done, and the test results reflected gross contamination, even above industrial limits per the DNR. Thallium was found throughout the property. It is our understanding that thallium is an extremely toxic metal that has been known as the poisoner's poison. At a meeting of the Economic Development Committee on July 7, 2020, Alderperson Neal asked Alderperson Killian if people were afraid of it, referring to the soil, because we've heard there's poison there. Well, poison has been found in the soil, and yes, we are very afraid of it, and we are extremely concerned. We now understand that the city mistakenly rezoned this area from residential to industrial. We also understand that that mistake has been confirmed by city planner Lenz. When a mistake is made and known to be a mistake, particularly one that could negatively impact the health, safety, and welfare of residents surrounding that area, anyone with a conscience would correct that mistake. If that mistake is not corrected, it is an insult to the residents. That property must be remediated based on non-industrial standards. It must be remediated to the most protective levels for residents in the area. In addition, there must be no additional industrialization allowed on that property. We do not want to continue battling with the city regarding gross contamination which affects its citizens. However, if the city decides to make this a fiscal matter rather than a matter of safety for its residents, we will not cease our efforts to obtain what is right and owing to the residents of this area and to the residents of this city. Sincerely, the Citizens for a Clean Wausau, Randy Racky and Terry Killen, your spokesperson. Thank you for having me speak.
Thank you. David Peeler?
Good evening. My name is David Peeler, and I live at 1025 Weston Avenue in Wausau. Some of you know me, some of you do not, so a brief introduction is in order. I am an attorney who's practiced in Wausau, and I'm a lifelong resident. I'm also a registered professional engineer, not an environmental engineer, but I speak a little bit of that language. I'm here tonight on behalf of 3M, and the reason is simply to reiterate the letter that was sent on February 19th, reiterating the interest that 3M has in considering that parcel at 1300 Cleveland and how it might be a part of redeveloping that, and at the same time resolving the problem that exists there. You heard the engineers talk about the different standards for remediation and the different, or the importance of trying to coordinate remediation and redevelopment. Now, I want to tell you something else, and that is, for those who don't know me, I spent quite a few years as the chairman of the Community Development Authority here. That gave me an excellent perspective on the capacity of the city of Wausau to deal with projects like this. At that time, the Craft Cleaners Project was started. The Community Development Authority and the Community Development Department have both got an excellent track record of doing environmental remediation and redevelopment within the city of Wausau. So my additional message to you as alders of the city is that this is something that is not unusual or has never been dealt with before in this city. You guys got this. You guys know how to do this, and you're wise enough to figure out how to get it right. It's early days, so we can't tell what's going to happen with this. 3M has been here for a long time, it is here now, and it will be here for a long time, and 3M is ready to listen and engage in dialogue with you and the city on future uses of this property and how 3M might be involved in that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Mike Tomsick?
Hi, I'm Mike Tomsick. I'm the Vice President of Finance of Colby & Colby. We're at 1323 South 11th Avenue, right here in Wausau. And some real just short comments. You know, after hearing the presentation tonight, it's pretty obvious that there does need to be remediation of that property. Certainly don't envy you as the council having to figure out exactly what level and the extent that's going to be done to get that remediated. But similar to 3M, Colby has expressed an interest in working with the city on a portion of that site, mainly the south side, and certainly have the concern if we were going to have any kind of affordable housing on that site that, you know, there has to be a good level of remediation. We certainly support that the northern portion of that site could be used for affordable housing. A lot of team members at Colby have expressed interest or have expressed concern that there's a lack of affordable housing for a factory worker nearby any of our plants and facilities. So I know that there was a proposal to, actually Colby put one forward that we would build a building for affordable housing, and I know that there's another proposal that was brought forward, and we'd certainly, again, like to work with the city to make that site remediated and back on the tax rolls. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all I have is registered. Thank you for stating your opinions and your understanding of waiting so long to speak. Our third item is discussion on plan forward to determine property use and possible contamination mitigation at 1300 Cleveland Avenue. I'm not quite sure how we move forward. What I have heard, and I will ask the body to chime in, is that we are in early days. I've heard that from both the consultants and the DNR. It appears that we are kind of out of the loop right now in that they are going to ask for more testing to get more solid information. So maybe I could ask the consultants, is that the plan? Are you going to be working with the DNR and with staff to determine what future testing needs to be done in order to figure out the absolute where we are all at with this contamination, to find out the extent of it?
Yes, so during the first initial meeting that we had with Matt and representatives of the city, there was a discussion of having DNR involvement from early stages of site investigation plan development all the way through the closure process. So I anticipate that, we will have cooperative effort between the city, GEI, and the DNR.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, then it'll be okay to discuss just broadly the contamination and land use issues that are on the table tonight.
Well, I think that will be future. I think this was determined property use was probably broadly is where are we going to silo this when this information comes in? What committee are we going to put this to? I don't know. We've had this issue in the past with the Thomas Street corridor, and I don't know if it's a good or bad thing to put. We had parks go with Park and Rec. We've had the corridor go to SISM. And so I have a couple of people's hands up. I can ask them, but do you have a comment about? Go ahead.
I do, and as the representative of the district in which the site resides, and I think it was very positive what occurred recently with the public in participation process, and we all received over 30 citizen feedbacks, whether it was through email or submission form. That was in under a week, and what I saw as the representative was that there were three key themes in that public feedback. One is that people would like the city zoning error corrected on this property, that they would like the property cleaned up to the highest cleanup standards possible. I think that would be non-industrial if we're talking about direct contact. And then certainly they do not want further industrial expansion on this property, whether that is 3M, Colby, or anyone else. And I think to some in my district and neighborhood, this is kind of like that movie Groundhog Day, where things just keep happening over and over again in the similar fashion. And yes, this is like the Thomas Street scenario and Riverside Park. People in that area had to really fight and push for years and years until finally, yes, it was validated that the contamination warranted being addressed. So it's similar here, and I certainly thank local companies for providing proposals, but we have to understand why the district and this area is in the mess that it's in, and that is because it's essentially spot zoning in that area where you have industrial operations next to people's homes, like in this case, right across the street. And, it's just not those times anymore. We need a buffer zone there between the industrial area and the residential area. If 3M had cared stringently about the neighborhood I represent, it would not have left an oil spill in Riverside Park sitting 7 feet below the surface, which is there right now. It would have cleaned up the TCE and PCE emanating from its parking lot area that, yes, did maybe come from an auto parts industry prior to its purchase, but that's still, no vapor intrusion studies were done there. With the putting an industrial operation, we must know everything about how that company has interacted with the environment and regulators. So if Colby has an interest, I want to see disclosure of regulatory interaction, and that includes allegations of illegal dumping and waste disposal on Red Wing Road in Rib Mountain. So we need to get all those documents, and we need to see what the history has been with both companies, with the environment and with regulators. So in conclusion, this is not a financial decision, I don't think. This is about the people we represent. So we've got various sources of funds, and I'm interested to hear the city attorney's ultimate analysis on responsible parties and certain indemnification agreements. But I think we need to place our environment and the people who live in it at the top, and I think we'll have some possible funding sources. So thank you, and thank you for reviewing all the public comment that has come in. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Rasmussen, you have your hand up?
I do, thank you. I think the path forward, we are, like you said, so early in the process, it's difficult to delineate any of the next steps until we know more. And, I think that it helps when we all receive information together for the sake of learning and research. And then we, as a group, digest that and then make a recommendation to our standing committees as their missions apply. So, when there is additional data available, I would be in favor of us receiving that information in a committee of the whole, like we are tonight, as a group, so we all get the same information. And then, the zoning issue, obviously, with any zoning issue, happens in the Plan Commission, like you said. What to do with property in terms of development happens in economic development. So, I think those committees can undertake the work that needs to be undertaken at the right time, but the time is certainly not now. So I would hope that we would receive the additional information kind of in this same format.
Thank you. Alder Ryan.
I guess I am a little bit concerned that each of the committees seem to have a limited direction, and I guess I'm just not sure where it should be, and I'm beginning to think that maybe the committee of the whole is the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Alder Larson.
I would have to concur with Alder Ryan's thoughts that I don't think that we should pass this off on any committee. We started this as a committee of a whole. We should finish it as a committee of a whole, and we should go through the entire transition as a committee of a whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or concerns? Alder Rasmussen, do you have your hand up again, or?
I do, yep,
Okay.
Thank you. I think it's important for us to recognize that we can receive information and materials as a committee of the whole, but by our rules, the committee of the whole cannot make a substantive decision and spend money. Those decisions have to be made by standing committees. So the authority of the committee of the whole is to make recommendations to standing committees. And so we will need to assign it into the committee structure that we have. But I think when we want to receive information of wide public interest, the committee of the whole is the best place for that. So I think we could continue in this format for a while, but at some point, the committees whose job it is to make the decisions need to make the decisions. Thank you.
Alder Killian? Or, sorry, Alder Martin.
I know you get used to looking at the other light bulb there, but I'm not sure exactly
who to address these questions to, so maybe hopefully I could parse this out and we can kind of find and answer a direction to, but listening to the conversation this evening, I know we've already have the wheels in motion in the Plan Commission to change the zoning back from industrial to a mixed use or a residential zoning. If we were to leave the zoning as industrial, is there anything that would preclude us from remediating the parcel to just a higher standard of remediation? You know, keep it industrial, but bring it to residential standards. I don't know if would Brad or Eric or the consultants be able to answer that question?
Mr. Lenz, could you answer that for us? There he is.
I don't know that I'm the best equipped to answer that. I think that's a remediation question. I mean, the zoning, really, that the city owns the property. I think we've heard tonight that really the remediation is tied to the end use of the property. So the zoning is different than the ultimate land use, especially when the city owns the property. We have a lot more control in determining that end use. You know, the zoning sometimes is flexible to match whatever land use we decide. So I think the zoning is not really particularly relevant in the discussion of the remediation. I think that's a separate issue.
Okay, but the way the way we seem to be moving forward at this point in time is we're using the zoning in order to drive the redevelopment, but instead we should really be thinking of redevelopment and then applying an appropriate land use to that area?
Yeah, I mean, the zoning's gonna determine, so the DNR is gonna look at the zoning, right? It's either gonna be industrial or non-industrial, but the actual use is going to determine what work really needs to be done, you know, for the end user. As you heard the consultant say, is that it would be nice to know the land use through this process so that we can kind of gear our remediation plan towards whatever that end use is going to be. And so, I mean, we could zone it a PUD and we wouldn't know what was going to be there, right? Mm-hmm. So the city could make that whatever it wants to be. And so, so yeah, the zoning is one thing, but really, as Brad said, it's really the land use. And the DNR is going to determine based on the zoning what the minimum requirements are, but the city could do something more than that.
We can always go over and above minimum requirements.
Correct. Yes.
So we can say, because we don't know what our land use is going to be, because we don't know if we want to put housing there at this point in time. I mean, it might be, I don't want to stick housing, and especially I don't want to stick affordable housing on a substandard plot, and then in 20 years, we're back all the way around looking at the same issues that, you know, we're dealing with today. So this is probably one of the more challenging, you know, questions that or problems that we've come up with in a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Killian?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I believe Alder Martins is correct. It is a challenging situation. I think what I know that the people in this part of my district that I represent absolutely do not want is further industrial expansion there, and not from the usual suspects of past polluters in that area. And so, if contractually the city was to assert that it will clean up this property to non-industrial standards and that a moratorium will be enacted on industrial expansion on that plot, then I think we're talking there. But for people in my district to take the city's word on pollution in that area without something formal, I think we'd have to kind of take the meeting to the maternity ward so we could find someone who may have been born yesterday, because we have had to push year after year after year after year for decades, and that's with Connor, with 3M, with Walico. So I think Alder Martin's maybe onto something where if there is something that is contractual and formal, which doesn't necessarily involve housing, but will essentially solidify the city's position on, one, clean up to non-industrial standards, and two, a moratorium on any industrial expansion there, then I think we might be starting to move to some middle ground if that's the way my colleagues would be moving. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up. We're still talking about how to move this forward, but I have gotten the kind of the gist that we are going to, since it's early days, we've heard from both the consultant and DNR representative here that they are going to discuss along with our staff members. The three of them are going to discuss next testing, it looks like. They have some ideas of what they want to see to get a better idea of where this came from, what's the extent, and we will then, once we get those records back and need to go through them again, we will have another committee of the whole so everyone can hear about it at the same time, and hopefully then we can then have a better plan of where to, what committee would need to do that for future remediation. And that will also give us a time to get through the zoning issue that is working its way through plan and beyond. Do we have a consensus on that, Council?
Is what you're saying that the rezone will proceed at the wish of the mayor, who chairs that body. The rezone will go ahead, and we'd just kind of wait and see and keep our eye on the remediation side of it.
Well, the testing, yeah, the further testing and the further.
And there's nothing we can do there.
Right, and the further, investigation into responsibility, yeah.
Okay,
And then
yeah.
when they have more of that, the meat on that, we will meet together to discuss that again. But
The only thing we can do as a body is pursue the rezone, and I think we should do that.
Right, and I can have the mayor.
Yeah, I guess,
confirm.
yes. So at Plan Commission, you were there, you voted. We will be moving ahead with a public hearing. And so we'll hear from everybody at I think next month's meeting. We'll have that public hearing on the rezone. And I look at that as kind of fixing, it's housekeeping. I mean, it was a mistake, so that's what we're looking at. And then we'll vote on it at the following meeting, and you'll all have a chance to vote on it too. And from there, we still do need to decide, probably economic development will need to decide what should we do with these RFPs that were requested last year. What should we do with, the cleanup and all of that as we get the more information in. But we have concrete steps to move forward, but we're also kind of in a holding pattern, I think, getting more information.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is not, as the consultant said, this is not a 6-week project. It's up to 12 months. So we have, we want to do it right, and it's just going to take some time. So I think I have seen nobody has, Mr. Lenz, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, just the mayor already covered. I just wanted to add that, the Plan Commission did authorize the public hearing to be held, so that will be held in March. And, the Plan Commission it's a commission. There's statutory obligations, there's citizen members, there's staff, so it's not just a standing committee that can necessarily, be delegated. It has certain powers and duties, so and rezoning is one of them, so that's sort of on a separate track, I guess, than the normal kind of divvying things up to committees. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So I don't see any more hands or, go ahead.
I have a question about zoning. If zoning goes to residential and say a big commercial complex wants to go in there, can zoning be readjusted?
Yeah, if we rezone it, Brad Lenz has told me that this would be I think the fourth time in 5 years, so it's something that's been going on, so. And actually on that RFP, you can see that it says would be subject to rezoning.
So it
which-
doesn't restrict other type of business or residential, going in there?
I mean, it does. You would have to hold another public hearing. Yeah.
Attempt to have it rezoned.
Yeah, it would follow the same process, though.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just building on Alder Wadinsky and Alder Martin's comments, I think these brainstorming concepts are a very good idea because my understanding from contemporary planning is a buffer zone is what we would typically want to see between industrial and residential. So, I mean, if there are other concepts on the table that would provide such a buffer, say as even maybe commercial, if housing would not be an option down the road once this is strictly cleaned up. I think all of these ideas are quite positive in relation to a buffer zone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I guess the only thing that I would just encourage, probably economic development and maybe this committee of the whole at some point, we probably do want to respond since, the city did ask for these RFPs. We do want to give some thought into what you want to happen there. So don't throw that to the back burner. It should be discussion that's happening at some point here. So that's my encouragement, because the sooner we figure out that use that we're thinking of, the more likely you'll be able to have the right kind of remediation. And that's just kind of reiterating what they said, so.
Go ahead, Alder Killian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if the Economic Development Committee was to dispose of these industrial proposals, and that would open the way then to looking at other options down the road, like commercial or residential, is that correct?
I would assume when the zoning is completed.
Yeah, to me, that's the policy question that you guys should be considering at committee.
And that would be Alder Neal's committee to decide when he would like to put that on the agenda to discuss. If he
Probably
does.
not next week. I would
No.
just encourage a little bit of time.
But, he can talk to staff. I mean, that's his role as chair. Okay, I think with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn, and I have one from Alder Peckham and a second from Alder Wadinsky. All in favor, say aye. Aye, and we are adjourned. And I want to thank our guests, our consultants, and Matt Thompson from the DNR. This was a long meeting, and you've taken a lot of questions, and we very much appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.